Wasn't it nice? It was nice, huh? Thank you. So I want to check in with people. How many people were here during the workshops today? How many people went to some of the small workshops? Good. I want to do a thank. I don't know. He's probably here. He is. Our Jeff again. Our Jeff Taylor. My little. So that was very Trump. My little Jeff Taylor. My Jeff Taylor over there. My Jeff Taylor. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you all the folks that worked on this. How many were volunteers here for today? Raise your hands. Any of the volunteers? Thank you guys so much. So can anyone share a little bit about how the day was for them? Like something that they learned or something that they felt really grateful to hear about? So I'm going to get out from this spotlight. Can somebody remember? Yeah, we did. The power of sharing. Power of share. But share.
Yeah. Hi. This is Thomas. My name is Thomas, and I learned about U equals U, and I didn't even know that existed. Undetectable means U equals U.
U equals U. How many people know what U equals U is?
Yeah.
How many people knew what it was before today? Okay, you snobs.
Yeah. But anyway, it was amazing. It was amazing. It was life transforming.
Okay, up here. Just bring it across.
I drove here from Riverside. It was well worth the drive. My name is Keith.
Everybody say hi. Hi, Keith. That's right. Okay, who else? Who has something that they want to say thank you for, or something that was beautiful? Where are you?
We got to talk.
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for being here. It's good to know that this is the first time I've ever been to an aging anything, and to know that I'm not alone is just incredible. And what I experienced today, I met some wonderful people today, and some socialization that I haven't really been doing lately. So I look forward to more.
Were you here this morning?
Yes, I was
So
there
what
all
did you
day.
learn this morning at my session?
What did I learn this morning?
What did you? Wait a second. Wait.
What I'm doing right now.
Go ahead.
Sharing what I'm doing right now, because it's not easy for me to get up and.
Good for you. What's your name?
It's Curtis Smith.
Everybody say hi.
Hello.
Good. Thank you so much. Okay, one more. Let's do one more.
Hi, my name is Leaf, and I had a great time today. And I just wanted to say that having an organization like HARP PS that sits above all the other organizations, not above, but in conjunction with all the organizations to hold their hands and work together is something really amazing for the Valley. And it's been sorely needed. So congratulations for making that happen.
Thank you. So I was going to have a special surprise today and have someone else introduce Cleve. I was going to have our friend Cecilia Cheung. She was in a certain film called When We Rise, and she's the trans person, and she was here today. And today is Trans Visibility Awareness Day. Is that the full title? So we're thinking of her, but she is on her way to the airport right now, and so I just want to acknowledge that it's Trans Visibility Awareness Day, and we think of all of our sisters and brothers out there. I want to take a moment now to introduce. Oh, that's right. Shut up. So here, everybody, this is something really, really important because it means that we get to know exactly what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. It also helps with fundraising and stuff like that. So at the end of this, promise me, like the Girl Scouts honor, whatever they do, like that you'll do it. Thank you. Okay. And I want to introduce, there's someone who's he's just so shy, and it takes so much to get him to come up on stage and actually take the limelight. He's just he's just cowering in a corner. We're just going to have to coax him out. But it's this dear friend of mine, and I want to say a few things. He is shut up. He is the founder of the National AIDS Memorial Quilt. How many people know the quilt and have been to see the quilt? Absolutely, absolutely life-changing, most beautiful, beautiful thing. Also, one of the co-founders of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and then more recently, the author of the book When We Rise. How many people have seen the miniseries When We Rise? Raise your hands. Okay. So I want to say something about this person as a friend. I've worked with this person with political demonstrations and stuff like that. And everything that you could possibly want in a person as far as integrity and the person who is taking the stand in the room, that every single person gets seen and that every single community is being seen and has a place at the table. This is all that he is every time that I have worked with him. He's such a good guy. He tries to do this crotchety, curmudgeon kind of thing, but it's not true. He's a fucking angel. It's amazing. So let's get this shrinking violet out. We just call his name. Cleve, 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 Cleve.
Someone, am I on? Can you hear me? Is this on? Is it on? Someone wanted to be a cheerleader when she was a little girl. That's all I can say. Greg and I work a lot together, especially on street protests in San Francisco, which is the way we're staying young. And these days there's a lot of protests. I'm going to talk for a while, and then I'm hoping you're going to talk and we can have questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, anything that's on your mind. There's nothing that's off limits, so feel free to ask or say whatever you want. But before we do anything, I would just like to take a moment because a year ago today, we lost Gilbert Baker, who was my dearest friend for over 40 years and gave us the rainbow flag. And I would just like to take a quick moment to remember Gilbert and the reality that one person really can touch and change the lives of millions of people all across the planet. And that's what Gilbert did. I also want to say that most of the work I've done for the last 15 years has been with the labor movement, specifically with the Hospitality Workers Union, which is called Unite Here. We don't have a single union hotel left in Coachella Valley, the Riviera used to be. And I know many of you will be traveling this summer when you get the hell out of here. And I want you to know there's going to be labor disputes in hotels and resorts all across the US and Canada, starting in mid to late summer. About half of our 300,000 members have their contracts up. There's going to be big fights. You don't want to be in a non-union hotel when there's a labor dispute. So go to fairhotel.org or just Google Union Hotel Guide. And please, when you plan your travel and plan your events, whenever possible, stay in union hotels. The women, our union is overwhelmingly women of color, immigrant women who have left their homelands to come here for whatever reasons, to raise their kids and grandkids. They work really hard. And in a union hotel, they make more money, they have safer working conditions, and they're treated with respect on the job. You should also know that our union, Unite Here, was the first union in the country to pass a resolution supporting full equality for LGBTQ and all matters governed by civil law. And we just, in the last months, succeeded in negotiating a new health plan. Our health plan is administered jointly by the employers, the big hotel chains, you're familiar with all of them, and our union. And we finally were able to persuade the employers to expand health coverage for transgender people, everything they need. So a lot of people talk the talk, we walk the walk. Also, I used to live here. I came down here, I don't know when it was, but it was too hot. And I tried for 8 years. I had a cute little house in Warm Sands. I will never have a house like that again in my life. I'm hanging on by one rent-controlled thread in San Francisco now. But I did live here, and I'm familiar with the challenges, and I also want to, give a shout out to Desert AIDS Project and all the volunteers and people in this town. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways that I think Palm Springs is unique. But let's start at the beginning. When I was a little baby homosexual, my family moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Phoenix, Arizona, where both my parents got teaching positions at Arizona State University. And my adolescence was pretty violent. I got beat up a lot. And I begin my book and end my book with the sentence that the movement saved my life. And I begin every speech and end every speech with that statement. The movement saved my life. That's not rhetoric. That's not hyperbole. I was one of those kids that was getting ready to kill himself. And the year I turned 13 was when we moved. It was 1968. The country was in great turmoil. And all I knew was that the kids at school were calling me a faggot and beating me up, and I was afraid to go to school, and I had no friends. And that year, both my parents had medical issues. My father had spinal surgery. My mom had a gallbladder operation. There were a lot of pain meds in the house, a lot of sleeping pills and heavy-duty narcotics, and I began to steal them one by one and hide them because I knew that at some point, they would understand why I was different. They would figure it out. I'd get caught, and that there would be only one way out. And we'd like to think we've made so much progress, but you all know our kids are still killing themselves every day. And as we're sitting here right now, no doubt within a mile or two from us right now, there's some little boy or little girl thinking that the only way out is to take their own lives. So I was one of those kids. And then I couldn't go to gym class because I got the shit beat out of me. And our doctor, though, I think the family doctor knew what was going on, and he decided that I had a lung disease and that I couldn't go to PE, And he wrote me a note. He said, keep this child out of PE. And so when all of the other, when the jocks were out there, doing whatever it is they do, and I would go to the library and read. And I would read magazines, and my favorite was Life magazine. I loved the photography, and also it was big, so you could hide behind it. And so every day during gym class, I would go to the library and I would read, and it was there in the end of 1971, the year in review issue of Life magazine. And I'm just leafing through it, and I turn the page, and the headline says, Homosexuals in Revolt. And there are photographs of GAA in New York and all these hot, long-haired boys with their fists in the air fighting the cops. And I thought, holy shit. And page after page, and I learned about Troy Perry and the Metropolitan Community Church and Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon and the Daughters of Bilitis. And I also learned that there was a little outpost of the movement in Mesa, Arizona called Gay Liberation Arizona Desert. Glad to be gay in God's desert was their slogan. And that was the moment I went to my bedroom and I found the pills I'd been hiding, and I took them out and I flushed them down the toilet and decided I wasn't going to kill myself, but I was going to get the fuck out of Phoenix as soon as I could. And I did. And I hitchhiked up to San Francisco. I was 17. I had long hair, no skills of any kind, this idiot white boy from Scottsdale landing in the Tenderloin. And I was on Polk Street, which, as many of you know, then was the center of the known gay universe. My corner was Polk and Clay. And it was a pretty grim existence. I do know what it's like to be homeless. That's something I don't think one ever forgets. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to have to do things you don't want to do just to have a roof over your head. I slept in the park many nights. I slept in doorways. I was abused by the cops. These are lessons I think one never forgets, nor should one. But I just had such amazing good fortune. The first lesbian activists I met were Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon. And they were in their fire-breathing lesbian feminist period there, and I just thought they were the most amazing people I had ever seen. And I struggled for a little while. Then I went back to Phoenix in an attempt to go to school because the only place I was going to get in was Arizona State because my parents taught there. And I joined the Gay Liberation Arizona Desert. And one night they got their first funding. It was like, I don't know, $200 or something from Associated Students. And they wanted to put on an event. And there were a couple of women that had joined us. And they said, well, we want to bring Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon. Their book, Lesbian Woman, had just been published. And I said, well, I have their phone number. And they were like, what? And I called them up and they came down and there was this big auditorium and it was all women. I mean, the parking lot was filled with these dusty pickup trucks from Colorado and Nevada and California. All these women had driven across the deserts and over the mountains and come to Tempe to see Del and Phyllis. And I'm in the audience, one of very few men in the audience, this smart-ass little punk kid, and I just kept noticing that Phyllis looked so much like my mom. And so she's going on about how they're going to smash the patriarchy. And in the Q&A, I said, I just love everything you're saying, but I got to tell you, you just remind me so much of my mom. and Phyllis just turned on and said, well, fuck you, kid, I'm not your mother. And we are still friends. Del passed away a few years ago, but Phyllis is alive. And I just saw her recently having dinner on Market Street. She's very, very frail. She's being really well cared for. She was with these 3 younger women who were helping her get in and out of the restaurant. I went in and I hadn't seen her in a long time. I knelt down and I said, hi, Phyllis, it's Cleve Jones. Do you remember me? And she looked up and she said, fuck you, kid, I'm not your mother. I don't know, I digress. But I met Jim Foster. Do you remember Jim Foster, the first openly gay person to address a national political convention? He spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 1972. And of course, I met Harvey Milk. And Harvey was the one who got me to go to school, cut my hair, stop selling weed on the corner. And I went to City College, which was free then, and now is again free, thanks to some legislation we just managed to get passed. So any young kid who wants to, and older people who want to start over, can go to City College for free. And I decided I was going to be a filmmaker. And they had a really good film program, so I enrolled in that, and I got a little Super 8 camera. Remember Super 8s? And it cost $320, which for me was an enormous sum. I won't tell you how I got it. And I made my first little movie because Harvey Milk and his friends at the Castro Camera Store were going to put on a film show. It continues today. It is now the San Francisco International Film Festival and is attended by tens of thousands of people. And is one of the major premier film festivals in the world. But back then it was literally a sheet tacked to the back of the wall in the back of Harvey's camera store. So I showed him my little Super 8 movie, and he took me aside where nobody could hear, and he said, I'm sorry, but you have no talent at all. And you need to change your major. And I said, okay. So I moved to San Francisco State and signed up for the political science program, and shortly after there met an amazing woman named Sally Gerhardt. Do you remember Sally Gerhardt? She is still around. She's living up in Willits, California, and is fragile but being very well cared for. She had the most beautiful voice. If you remember the film Word Is Out, how many of you remember that? That's when I first got to know Sally, and she came from a very Christian background, and that woman could preach, and she just had this amazingly beautiful voice. And I was the one who introduced Sally Gerhardt to Harvey Milk so that they could be the debating team against John Briggs in the Briggs Initiative. And how many of you were in California during the Briggs Initiative? Yeah, and we never thought we could win that one, did we? We all thought we were going to lose this one. And that was the first time we won a statewide victory. And that wouldn't be repeated for 30 years. But it still is something that I remember because we did that without the big black tie dinners, without the celebrity endorsements, without the big multimedia buys. We did it because people like you and me went walking door to door. I'm your neighbor. I live down the street. Don't vote for this. It will hurt me. We came out. I think it was the first time that thousands of us came out en masse to confront a political situation. And Harvey was really kind to me. And I think it's important for people to remember now that he's been mythologized and played by Sean Penn. And you know, he was an ordinary man. Harvey was not a genius. He was not a saint. In his life, he experienced all of the frustrations and defeats and humiliations that most of us have to endure in our lifetimes. He was penniless when he died. His personal life was also often a mess, but he had courage. His love for his city and his people was real, and he was one of the kindest, funniest, most outrageous people I've ever known in my life. And I just don't think there's any question that meeting Harvey Milk was the single most important thing that ever happened to me in my entire life, and that everything that I have survived since, everything I've managed to accomplish since, everything I've learned since, it all really goes back to meeting Harvey and finding his body on the floor on November 27th, 1978. I had never seen a dead person before. I was 23, 24, and I had heard that the mayor had been shot, and I'd raced upstairs, and I came around the corner, and I saw his feet sticking out into the hallway, and I knew it was Harvey because he only had one pair of dress shoes, a pair of secondhand wingtips that he bought at the thrift shop. And you know, I looked around the corner, and a cop was turning him over, and I had never seen that, and it was, I couldn't breathe. It was just so horrifying, and all I could think was, well, it's over now. He was my mentor. He was going to get me a job. He was the one who'd gotten me back in school and gotten me credit for doing an internship, and he believed in me, and he told me I didn't have to change. I was good just the way I was, and he was our leader, and he's dead on the floor, and I can think it's over now. It's all over. I couldn't imagine how he would continue, and we're stuck in his office while they bundle up the bodies in the hallway, and we're playing the audio tape that he left because he predicted he was going to be assassinated, and I used to make fun of him and tell him he wasn't important enough to get assassinated. And that just bizarre, surreal moment of listening to his voice talking about what he knew was going to happen, and right out there, they're bundling up his body to cart him off with the mayor, and I just kept thinking to myself, it's over, we're done. And then the sun went down, and the people began to gather, gay and straight, young and old, black and brown and white. We filled Market Street. I bet some of you were there. And we marched in silence, 30,000, 40,000 people down Market Street with our candles, and we filled Civic Center Plaza. And I remember standing there with all my grief and looking around at all those different kinds of people, not just the people that looked like me or talked like me, but all these different kinds of people, Filipino families, African American families, lesbians, and the people we now call transgender, and then a whole lot of just straight people who were there who had been touched and moved by what had happened. And I remember standing in that lake of candlelight and knowing that I was wrong. It wasn't over. It was really just beginning. And it was a long winter. Dianne Feinstein became mayor. The police started harassing the bars again. Dan White was put on trial for the murders. And somehow in San Francisco, they managed to impanel a jury that was all white and all heterosexual. Now, that's quite an achievement to find a jury like that in San Francisco in 1979, really. No black people at all. They were 17% of the population. No gay people at all. We were easily 15% of the population. And he got off. He was convicted of manslaughter and would end up serving only 5 years in prison. And when word of that hit the news. We marched again, but we weren't carrying candles that night. We marched on City Hall, and we burned all the police cars we could find. And it was, I think, the most violent uprising in the history of our movement. And the very next day was Harvey Milk's birthday, and I closed Castro Street, and Sylvester came and sang, and we danced all night long. That's what we do. For me, and since I see, are there any young people in this audience? Okay, good. I'm free to speak. Yeah, dream on, honey. I'm sorry. I'm just hateful that way. No, I can, since there's no young people, I can say that I'm not offering this as career guidance, but in my case, being accused of inciting a riot got me a great job. And I don't know how many of you remember Leo McCarthy. He was Speaker of the California State Assembly then, and he hired me to go up and work in Sacramento. I was assigned to the Health Committee. My job was to look at all the legislation coming through the Health Committee for the Assembly and let the Democratic members know what the Democratic leadership's position was. It was everything from like asbestosis to early Alzheimer's research. And I, of course, didn't know diddly about public health. So I subscribed to every public health related journal publication in the country. Many of them are still around. You probably know of them. And also the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report out of the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. And so it was there in June of '81 that I read those first 3 paragraphs written about the disease we now call HIV/AIDS. And I remember being alarmed. I thought, this doesn't compute. And I clipped it out. And I put it up on my bulletin board. And I think I wrote in the margin just when things were looking up. That was June of '81. I think it was in July that the first New York Times article came out that had, I think, that talked about, the headline was 41 dead. That was the summer of '81. By the fall of 1985, as we were getting ready for the annual Candlelight March, remembering Harvey Milk and George Moscone, it seemed to me that everybody I knew was dead or dying or caring for someone who was dying. And a couple of weeks before the annual tribute to Harvey and George, so we're talking about mid-November 1985, I was marching up and down Castro Street with my staple gun, putting up flyers reminding people of the Candlelight March that was coming up, and stopped at Marcello's Pizza Parlor. It's still there at Castro and Market, and had a slice and a Coke, and I'm leaning up against the newspaper stand, and I see the headline on the Chronicle says 1,000 dead. And we had already lost 1,000 in San Francisco. And I remember standing at that corner, and I have told this story so many times, but it still kind of overwhelms me just telling it. I stood at that intersection where Greg and I have rallied the troops so many dozens and dozens of times, and I stood there and I looked up and down the streets, and I realized that of those first 1,000 to die, almost every one of them had lived and died within 6 blocks of where I was standing, and there was no evidence at all. Beautiful restored Victorians, you've been there. The bars, the restaurants, you smell coffee and food, you hear music and laughter. There's not the slightest indication that this was the epicenter. Around the corner was Metropolitan Community Church, where black and white men together used to meet. There were hundreds of them. They disappeared. My boyfriend, Felix Velarde Munoz, who worked for La Raza, was part of the first Gay Latino Alliance, gone. And I was just so angry. And I was with my friend Joseph, who's also gone now, and I remember saying to him, people don't understand. If this was a meadow with 1,000 corpses rotting in the sun, then people would see it, and they would understand it, and if they were human beings, they would be compelled to respond. You were there. There was no response. We had a man in the White House who's since been elevated to sainthood in some quarters, who said nothing until more of us had died than died in the entire Vietnam War. And when they did speak about it, as they did at a Republican state convention in Long Beach the next year, they had bumper strips that said, AIDS, it's killing all the right people. Homosexuals, black-skinned Haitian refugees, sex workers, IV drug users. And when I look back at that time, I think one of the core lessons, and where's Mark King? He asked me earlier, what's the legacy, what are the lessons? We talk a lot about homophobia. If you want to talk about one of the consequences of homophobia, well, maybe, you ought to consider millions of dead heterosexuals and their children. Because there's no doubt in my mind, and there shouldn't be any in yours, that the response of this country would have been an awful lot different. But it was homophobia followed by racism, pure and simple, that prevented the one nation on earth that had the advanced knowledge, the resources, the institutions, the money. We could have made a difference. Remember Legionnaire's disease? We could have made a difference, but those lives were not valued. And when they talked about what was happening, they sneered about Adam and Steve, and God doesn't like to be fooled, and all this bullshit, and the delight of the preachers. And I was just furious about that, and it hurt. My friends were incredible. Of my circle of friends, believe me, I was the least interesting. My friends, if they had lived, they would be taking home not just Emmys and Oscars and Grammys, but Pulitzers and Nobel Prizes. They would be serving in the United States Senate, House of Representatives. They would be delivering important advances in research, in arts. And by 1985, I'd already lost almost all of my dearest friends. And so that night, on November 27th, 1985, when we marched to City Hall, we carried candles, but I also had stacks of poster board and sacks of markers, and I had Harvey Milk's old bullhorn, and I talked to the crowd about who they'd lost, and I had everybody write down the name of someone they'd loved who had died so horribly, so young. And we went to City Hall, and we left our candles there for Harvey and George, and then we went down to the old Federal Building at UN Plaza, and we'd hidden some ladders in the shrubbery, and we got a nun with a beard on a bicycle to distract the police over there, and we broke through the police lines, and we put our ladders up, and we climbed up, and we had big rolls of tape, and we covered the gray stone facade of the Federal Building with this patchwork of names. It was a cold, drizzly night. I walked through the crowd. I listened to people whispering. There's no chanting or music or speeches, just people listening, watching, whispering, and I could hear what they were saying. Oh, I didn't know he died. Or I went to school with her. I didn't know. I wish I'd known. Nobody told me. And you could just feel like that deep, yearning need to find a way to grieve together and also try to find a way to warn the world. I flunked biology, but I'm not stupid. There's no such thing as a gay virus. What was happening to us was going to spread, was already spreading, and the silence around it was just deafening. And I got to the edge of the crowd and looked back over the heads of the people looking at these placards on the wall, and I thought to myself, it looks like some kind of strange quilt. Thought of my grandma, thought of my great-grandma back in Bee Ridge, Indiana. One of the quilts she made is on my bed at home now. And it was such a warm, comforting, middle-class, middle American, traditional family values sort of symbol. And I thought, that's it, that's the symbol. I want traditional family values. I believe in traditional family values. I want them to apply to me and my family. And that was the idea of the quilt. And everybody told me it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard of. For a whole year, all I could do was think, we should make this quilt. We should make this quilt. Each panel should be the size of a grave, thinking about when I was standing at Castro and Market and thinking if this was a meadow with the bodies lined up so people could see and understand. And I thought of it as therapy, ways of, working with your hands. So I imagine people sitting on living room floors in church basements with needle and thread and scissors and fabric and telling stories. And also we're so dispersed as Americans. And I could imagine people in Vermont making part of the panel, and then the nephews in Georgia making part of the panels and having them assembled. And I thought it was such a great weapon, to be deployed against the government that had failed us. Let's lay it out on their fucking front door and let them see the consequence of their inaction and their hatefulness and their stupidity and the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. And but everybody said, no, Cleve, it's the stupidest thing you've ever come up with. Like, nobody sews anymore, girl. And that sounds really expensive. I don't know. Where are you going to raise the money for that? And I don't know, Cleve, it seems a little morbid. And then from ACT UP, that's what we need is everybody to sit around and make quilts. That's going to save us, Cleve, And Larry Kramer wanted to burn it. I said, Larry, we'll set it on fire, but I'm wrapping you up in it first. Yeah. Well, it ended up becoming the world's largest community arts project. Tens of thousands of people participated in creating the quilt. Hundreds of thousands of people volunteered. Some of you, no doubt, many of you, no doubt, volunteered for the various displays around the world. And tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people received the message of the quilt through the media. And at the core of it, I think it can be summed up quite simply that all these lives had value, all of them. So I believe that the quilt and ACT UP and the incredible movement of the caregivers, which I think gets overlooked sometimes. The ACT UP was very dramatic, the quilt was very emotional, but there were also so many thousands of people who just dropped everything, ignored their careers, their own families to make sure that homebound people were fed, that people were housed, that the little bits of information we finally began to get disseminated. So I'm really proud of what we did with it. And also, it gave me something I needed desperately. It connected me with all those good people out there, all the parents who would never consider abandoning their children. We heard all those horrible stories, and we saw it, friends who'd lost everything. Ken Jones, one of the other characters in When We Rise, that wasn't a made-up story. His partner, who had been with for years and years and years, and never once did his family come to visit him until he dies. And then they came home to sell his furniture and throw Ken out in the street. So I think in a lot of ways, some of our most amazing recent victories have their roots in that dark, horrible decade and a half before treatment. I never wanted to get married. I came out of gay liberation. We wanted to smash the patriarchy, end war, and have sex with everybody. Marriage was never on my list. I fought for it because I believed everybody should have that right, just like I never wanted to be a freaking soldier. I was raised Quaker, I remember the good old days when straight men pretended to be gay to get out of the army. But what we went through with AIDS changed the way we thought about ourselves. And after we saw or experienced ourselves what it felt like to be in that kind of relationship and to lose it, to watch people die because they could not have health care, because they didn't qualify for their partner's health insurance, to have people like Ken who were thrown out of their homes, to have friends who died alone because their partner of 15 years was not allowed in the ICU. And I think that started to change the way we think about ourselves and our relationships and the institution of marriage. Yes, it's just a piece of paper, and that piece of paper matters. And then from some of my friends on the left, they would say, well, we have to, abolish marriage. I said, well, yeah, good luck with that. And what happens to us while you're doing that, So I think part of how we won marriage equality was that a whole lot of people and the next generation who were coming up and looking at our generation with horror said, wait a minute, what do you mean this isn't a marriage? Fuck you. This is exactly what a marriage looks like. This is what a community is. So I think that that crucible of the pandemic formed us, it changed us, empowered us. And I never want to say, something good came out of it. But we survived and we learned a lot. And I think that many of the lessons that we learned as we fought back against the government, against the pharmaceuticals, against the religious charlatans, is very important now. And one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about, and it's a little, there's a bit of a disconnect talking about it in this town, but it is the reality that the neighborhoods are going away. So I'm 63, I'm living in the Castro. There's a third as many gay bars as there were when I got there. When I got there were 15 lesbian venues. There's not one left. While Wild Side West is like lesbian one night a week. But it's mostly techie boys. There's also a third as many LGBT-specific mental health services available in San Francisco today. Studio apartments, I don't know, $3,000 a month. There's great leaders of our movement in this room today who are dealing with the threat of imminent eviction and displacement. And then I talked about this and so many people, especially young people, but not just the millennials, and they say, oh, well, Cleve, cities change. Oh, well, duh, and thank you for your brilliant insight. Yes, cities change, but cities are changing in a new way now. And a pattern that's been in place for generation after generation has been turned upside down. The inner cities were the places for the new immigrants, the refugees from war and famine and persecution, the bohemians, the homosexuals. And we lived cheek by jowl in these densely populated districts. And people also forget, after World War II ended, there was the great migration of African Americans out of the South into the northern cities to get the defense industry jobs. And then began a phenomenon called white flight, as the white people began to move to the suburbs because they didn't want black neighbors. And so the populations of these cities the inner cities began to decline. San Francisco's population peaked in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and then declined every decade until the end of the 80s. So these neighborhoods were not, as I have been told by idiot children, who say, oh, well, we're just doing to you what you did to the Irish and Scandinavians who used to live in the Castro. No, we didn't evict them. They didn't want to live there anymore, and they were moving out to the suburbs. They didn't want to be around gay people. And the people that were living in Hayes Valley and the Haight-Ashbury didn't want to be around black people, and they were moving out. This is all well documented. This isn't me just, spinning tales here. So we built our neighborhoods. And the parallels with the African American neighborhoods are really important to understand. In San Francisco, we had a thriving African American cultural district along Fillmore. I mean, it was a center, hugely important African American culture. It is gone. The black population in San Francisco when I arrived was 17%. It is now maybe 3%, and it has dropped while I've been talking. So the forces of gentrification and displacement have completely turned that pattern upside down. So now those inner cities, those densely constructed zones that we used to live in, that black people used to live in, that refugees used to live in, are now being claimed by the wealthiest of the wealthy. And we are being pushed out. Now, I spent all of last year on the road, pushing my book. Please buy it if you haven't. It's the same everywhere. Seattle, Capitol Hill. Midtown Philadelphia, the Black and the LGBT community are simultaneously. Where are there people here from Philadelphia? Am I right? You know, huge struggle. DuPont Circle, Washington, D.C., Lakeshore in Chicago, Lavender Heights in Sacramento. They're building new condos for the rich there. Now, there's two anomalies to this. One is Palm Springs, and the other is Wilton Manor in Florida. Mostly retirement communities. Y'all still have relatively affordable housing here, but I checked on the way down, and it's going up. It went up 5% for rentals last year. Now, I bought my little house down here when it was very affordable, and like an idiot, I sold it at the bottom of the market, but I wanted to go home. But now, it's going up here. So, even if you all manage to, and then there's the other reality here, which is that the Agua Caliente band can blow it all up like that. Arena Street, you know, how many of you are living on tribal land? So you're not safe here from this. It's different, you're a little bit protected by it, but also this will never be that kind of neighborhood that existed in the bigger cities because there's not enough economic opportunity or educational opportunity for our young people. Okay, so it's great that our seniors have a place here where they are relatively safe, and I think Desert AIDS Project does a good job, but you're not safe from this process that's happening. So what we see is that the neighborhoods are going away, and when we lose the neighborhoods, it's not, I mean, people try to trivialize this, and there was this young reporter from The Guardian who followed me around for 3 hours in the Castro and then decided the only thing I was complaining about was that there were straight tech bros in my bar. You know, it's way more important. If we lose the neighborhoods, we lose a lot. We lose the political power that comes when we're concentrated in precincts and can elect our own and defeat our enemies and pass the legislation we want and defeat the bills that are going to hurt us. We lose that. You've taken over the city council here. We'll see how long that lasts as you face gentrification and more straight people come in and you're pushed out. It diminishes our political power. Our cultural vitality, that amazing magic that happens when poets and painters and filmmakers and writers and dancers are inhabiting the same space and making eye contact and having wine together and collaborating. Now, I know we can collaborate online, I collaborate online, but there's nothing like that amazing, magical queer energy that is unleashed when our creative people are in that same space. It's not a coincidence that the Castro gave us the rainbow flag and the first gay synagogue and the first marching band and the first chorus. That's wonderful, important stuff that keeps us healthy and strong and together as a community. And then finally, how do we maintain the specialized social services that are so necessary for the most vulnerable among us? How do we fund them? How do we maintain them? Where do our kids go? Where would 17-year-old Cleve hitchhike to now? I couldn't even imagine going to the Castro. Where do they go? Yeah. I've got a story about that too, but with that another time. Sean Penn took me to the Coachella Festival. When we lose the ability to provide social services. We in this room who are HIV positive, I suspect without a single exception, are alive because we were able to be seen by HIV specialists. Transgender people, to survive, must be cared for by people who understand their issues, who understand their bodies, who know what's going on with them. Our kids, our seniors. We're not building enough housing for our seniors. Some cities are trying it. We don't have nonprofit housing development corporations. We're not thinking economically about the community's future. We need to start do that. We need to do that now. We should have done it 20 years ago. The neighborhoods in my city that are surviving, Chinatown is surviving, barely. The Mission is still has a strong Latino presence. A big part of that was that back in the 70s, they started not-for-profit housing development corporations, and they bought buildings, and they kept their people in there. And they were able to resist the power of the developers who were, passing out the money to all the politicians. I mean, our city government is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the developers and the tech industry. We need to start getting really smart about how we preserve our political power, maintain our cultural vitality, and our ability to deliver those social services. And this is something that Greg and Matt and I talk about every time we get together. Who got evicted? We've had friends who've committed suicide in the last few years after getting evicted because they had no place else to go. I'm in a 2-unit building. My landlord lives upstairs. He's very old. He's like the last old, straight, angry Irishman of Most Holy Redeemer Parish, and he lives above me. And when he's gone, I'm gone. And I don't know where I'm going to go. And I am well aware of my privilege. I'm a white man, educated, with a good job, good insurance, a family that loves me, connected. I don't know where I'm going to go when I lose my little apartment on 18th Street, as you've heard me. I mean, this is all we talk about anymore in San Francisco, is where we're going to go and who's going to take care of us. Gee, will my cousin be able to take care of me? And I think, God, my nieces are so young. I hate to burden them with this, It's really scary. So maybe this is something you all can help with. I know you're all living lives of leisure down here and golfing and everything. But we need to start getting smart about this. And, why don't we have a credit union? Why the hell don't we have a credit union? We just had fires up in Sonoma and Napa County. You had fires down around here too. Up there they have a Redwood Credit Union. They've been leading the way on rebuilding, getting people housed, finding them the money to rebuild. Credit unions are nonprofit. They're progressive by definition. The first credit unions were started by African Americans, by Jews, by farmers, people banding together, using their economic power for the benefit of the membership. I'm embarrassed to tell you who I bank with. They're disgusting. About a year or so ago, after the latest outrage, I went online. I thought, what's the best? I posted on Facebook, what's the best credit union in San Francisco? Got lots of cool responses. And then I thought, well, there must be an LGBT credit union. There isn't. So we need to get smarter. We need to understand that the ways that we organized and fought in the past, some of them are still valid. Many of them are still useful. I'm still marching. But we need some new strategies. And I think that credit unions, housing development corporations, community land trusts, I think those are the things we need to look at in the future. I'm going to shut up now for a minute at least. And I want to close with one final comment, but I'm happy to hear anything that you have to say. And please don't be shy. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, Cleve. Thank you so much for today. You said, I have a question, but first, you said that you felt the movement helped you save your life. I feel that the movement saved my life twice. First, when I was a teenager in Atlanta, and like you, was thinking about committing suicide and then saw an article in the newspaper about gay people, homosexuals rising up in Stonewall. And that's when I threw away the pills. And then later, when I was head of the Greater Cincinnati Gay Coalition in Ohio, and I quoted Harvey Milk's Love It or Leave It speech at the first Cincinnati Gay Pride celebration when the mayor of Cincinnati was none other than Jerry Springer. and then later, when I came to California and followed Harvey's advice about come to California, I came to Los Angeles. But I remember marching at the first March on Washington, and I carried a sign saying, Harvey Milk walks with me. And that's how important he was in inspiring me to become an activist. But then the second was, I don't even remember what year it was in the 80s when we did a die-in with ACT UP at the Federal Building in Los Angeles. Anybody know what year that was? I forgot. In the 80s. And then seeing your quilt in Washington, D.C. What year was that?
The first display of the quilt was 87.
Okay.
And we were there in 88
Yeah.
and 89 and 92.
Right.
And
So just seeing that, and then fast forward till today, when I just recently walked through the Desert AIDS Project and just saw the wonderful things going on there and the wonderful people working there, and just felt so grateful for people like you and earlier people like Harvey who literally did save my life. And so I feel my life has been saved twice. When I addressed the first Gay Pride rally in Cincinnati, I shamelessly plagiarized Harvey's speech and said, "My name is Walter Williams, and I'm here to recruit you." Remember that line?
Yes, and you've shamelessly plagiarized my book, too. Because it ends with, "The movement saved my life twice."
Really. And then I read his speech to the people in Cincinnati, and that is, the Love It or Leave It speech. Mm-hmm. And that's the national impact that it had on people. And so my question is, after all these years, are you amazed as I am to be alive to see a time when Harvey Milk's picture is on a United States postal stamp? And what does that say about the wonderful things that we have accomplished and, in fact, have saved so many lives? And as you have so eloquently spoken about tonight, continue to do the important work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say a little bit about what you asked when I close out, but I often run up against young people who are so cynical and have been so devastated by what's happened with the elections. And I hear them say, "Oh, there's nothing we can do," or "we're power," many different ways, but the bottom line is they think they're powerless. And that's when I say, no, you're not powerless. And I think that is something we learned. Yes.
Hi, my name's David Gray, and I'm one of the founding people for the Harvey Milk Diversity Coalition Breakfast. And on May 18th, Cleve is going to be honored with our Diversity Leadership Award this year on the 40th anniversary of Harvey's assassination. So if you'd like to hear him again, please come. Please come on May 18th. It's at the Palm Springs Convention Center. And it's a little bit of a plug, but it is actually one of the largest events here in Palm Springs. We started about 7 years ago, and we have over 1,000 people who come. And we really raise money for the GSAs here in the Valley, which are the Gay Student Alliances, and all of our funds go to that. So I really was inspired by your talk today, and look forward to hearing you again.
Great, and I'm so glad you're supporting our kids. They really need every bit of help they can get.
In the early 80s, I was at Arizona State University, and one of the things that I learned from people living and dying with AIDS at that time was that my life force was powerful, my voice was powerful, and that I should express it. And I started my decades of activism then. I was wondering, when you came face to face with the loss of your loved ones, did you feel compelled that you had a short amount of time to do a lot? Did you feel that you had limited opportunities to live your life? And when you reflect on what your life has been and still is, do you understand, as we do, how extraordinary your life has been?
Oh, thank you. I will say my life is weird. Lately, it's been really weird. Like, it was so funny after the film Milk came out. How many of you saw Milk? I was living here when it came out, and I'd come down here, and I was pretty lonely. I found it difficult to make friends here. And then that film came out, and suddenly, like, all these young people are calling and emailing, and I felt like I was being exhumed. And it was so odd. And I thought the film was very well done. And I got to pick the actor that played me in that, Emile Hirsch, who I thought did a wonderful job. Though I have to tell you, I was taller. And I mean, it's just odd, but my friends that didn't make it, I think, that's what I reflect on the most, is what they would have accomplished. Because honestly, I mean, I'm kind of a dingbat. I mean, I'm not that special. And my friends, like, they were amazing. I still think about that a lot. If I can help persuade people to understand that they're not powerless, I feel really, really good about that. And another thing that comes to my mind, my sister and I recently lost our parents, and my mom was a dancer and left home when she was 17 to go to New York and danced with Martha Graham and had an amazing career. And then she got tuberculosis and was put in a sanitarium for almost 3 years. And when they finally cured her, they said, you can't get married. You shouldn't get married because you can't have kids and you can't ever dance again. And she got out, and the doctors told her this, and she said, fuck you, and married a man 10 years younger and started dancing and had 2 kids. And the last time she danced on stage, she was 86 years old. And when I got diagnosed, or when I got very sick at one point, I had pneumocystis, and I called her and I said, the doctors say I'm probably not going to get through this. And she said, well, you just tell the doctors to fuck off. But that winter of 78, 79 was the first Christmas I went home after leaving home. And after Dad went to bed, Mom and I stayed up and drank half a bottle of red wine. And she listened to all the stories, and she said, you're living through one of those periods in history. And when you're old, people are going to be writing books and making movies about you and your friends and the life that you've been living. And so Mom actually predicted all of this, and I like that. Yeah.
You very eloquently identified threats to our community. I'd like to get your reaction to what you think are the opportunities when it comes to digital platforms. You talk about the lack of connection at a personal level, and yet we have a tool available that can make it very easy on a scalable level for us to connect. So how do you think in this next digital revolution, how do we begin that?
Oh, well, somebody needs to write a book about that. I don't know where to begin with that, except to say that in my experience, I kind of resisted social media for a little while. Now I'm in it. I have like 30-some thousand followers on Facebook and about 16, 17,000 on Twitter, which I know is not a lot, but it's a lot for me. And I'm grappling with this kind of on a daily basis, because I find that the negativity of social media is just overwhelming. So I don't know the answer, but what I would like to hear is what is the answer that allows me to use the internet and these platforms in a way that truly does connect me. But I find that it's really a double-edged sword, this ability to connect and simultaneously isolate. And I have friends who are in, I do this union work, so I interact with a lot of people who are in HR departments, in hotels, and also in tech companies. And there's a lot of, I hear this refrain often that they're getting these young people that look really good on paper, but they have zero social skills because they've never made eye contact with another human being. So I'm troubled by a lot of it, and I think that a big part of the mess we're in politically has to do with this simultaneously very powerful, potentially positive impact, and the really bad and worsening rapidly negative nature of it all. But do I have a solution? No, I don't. I'm being told to wrap it up, so I just want to, oh, yes, okay. You've been overruled.
Hi, Cleve. Thank you so much for your talk and for sharing your story. And when you talk about the epidemic and out of such desperation and despair, came survival, and some positive things did come out of that because we fought our way out of it. And it seems like similarly, movements today are coming out of that same dark place. We saw that with the Parkland shooting and the kids that have risen up, and Black Lives Matter. And I just wonder, if you could just give just a second to talk about that, and if you indeed feel hope for the future.
Well, I'm just going to end with what I wanted to say anyway, which I think relates to that. And yes, the movement saved our lives twice. I thought my life was over before it even began. When I was a frightened little skinny teenager in Arizona, hoarding pills to kill myself. And then I read about the movement in Life magazine, and I flushed the pills down the toilet, and I hitchhiked to San Francisco. My life wasn't over. It was just beginning. Then I got to San Francisco, and I was mentored by Harvey Milk, who took me under his wing and educated me and encouraged me and told me I had value. And then I found his body on the floor, and I thought it was over. And that night, we marched. Tens of thousands, gay and straight, black and brown and white, and it wasn't over. And we kept fighting. And then AIDS came and killed everybody I loved the most. And I thought it was over again. But it wasn't over, and we acted up, and we made quilts, and we stormed the NIH, and we got arrested, and we fought back, and we marched and marched and marched, and it wasn't over. This last election, I'm in my apartment. My boyfriend's in Washington, D.C. on business. He's a lot younger than me. We text a lot. I'm sitting in my apartment in the Castro watching the state results come in, and I see, Florida goes, and I text him, it's over. It's all over now. And he texts back, no, honey, it's not. Hang in there. And then Pennsylvania goes, and I know for sure it's over. And I call him up, and I'm ranting at him, it's over. The fascists are going to take over. We've lost everything. It's all over. And after about a little bit, he cuts me off. He said, honey, you just went from 0 to Auschwitz in 30 seconds. Are you alone in the apartment? And I said, yes. And he said, well, what are you doing? Get down to Castro Street. And we gathered on Castro Street, and soon there were hundreds, and then there were thousands, and then there were tens of thousands, and we were gay and straight and young and old and black and brown and white, and we marched all night, and we've been marching ever since, because it's not over. It is not over. Every one of us has more work to do. And I want you to know one last thing about me. I am 63 years old. I am healthy. I am happy. I am in love, and I am ready for the fight. And I know you are too, so let's just keep doing it till the day we drop. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleve, and thank you all for coming. Please treat yourself to, we have a wine and beer cocktail reception outside. We also have soft drinks and appetizers. Your evaluations, there's a basket outside the door, or leave it on one of the chairs right by the front. But please leave those with us so we can improve what we do next time. Thank you again.